These are slightly weird microphones. Give us some minutes.
Hair again, the hair.
It's a family issue.
Way too small, Scott.
Just give you all a moment to recover while we try and sort out our microphones.
No hair issues for you, Paul.
Like that. Is that it? God, why can't we have time like that? We normally do. This is so weird. So weird. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight. I think that was difficult for all of us, wasn't it? My name's Lindsay Hilsum. I'm the International Editor of Channel 4 News. I'm also Marie's biographer. We have here Chris Martin, who's the person who directed that extraordinary film. We have Scott Gilmore from the... who is the person...
Give him a big round there.
Yeah. Scott Gilmore, who is the lead lawyer involved in the court case to try and bring Marie's murderers to justice. We have Kat Colvin, who is Marie's sister, who is bringing that case. And we have Paul Conroy, who I note from the reviews of that film has been described as gruffly charismatic.
I'll be gruffly tonight.
Well, you do that. So I think... It's not the first time I've seen that film, but I have to say, as Paul would say, that was fucking hard, man. That was really hard.
Very good description.
So I'm going to start. How fucking hard for you is it every time you see it?
It gets fucking harder every time, actually.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I've seen it a few times now, obviously, but every time I watch it, something new pops out at me, or it will trigger another set of memories that I just hadn't had before. So it's a bit of a lottery, you know. Sometimes I laugh, you know. I always laugh because I see little parts there that just remind me of just how much laughing we actually did, even when times were pretty fucking hard. We still managed to laugh.
That was Marie.
And yeah, and you know, it really was. I mean, it looked pretty grim, and it was pretty grim, but you know, it wasn't like that all the time. We used to, you know, chuckle our way through most of them situations, or get through them and then have a little chuckle and carry on. So don't be too sad. No, yeah, should be sad.
Do be sad, but
do be sad,
but understand that in the midst of all this horror and Marie's death, she still was the funniest person ever, wasn't she, Kat?
Absolutely.
And you knew
That's
that.
why I love hanging out with Paul, because he's got that black sense of humor. But you know, I've seen it before. I've seen the film before. I haven't seen it with you in the room.
No, that's
a different
another
experience.
and again, adds another angle. Being there with Kat.
Well said it. Paul said it. I hope I'm never so jaded that doesn't. It's not really hard to watch, and I don't. I hope for none of us it's easy to ever watch something like that.
Chris, one of the things that's amazing about the film is obviously some of it is reconstruction and some of it is found footage. How did you find all of that footage in a war zone that had been taken over by the Syrian government and so on? It's extraordinary, some of the footage you found.
We just had good people. Sorry, I'm talking to... we just had, lots of different great people looking for it. And there's no magic way of doing it. You just have to keep on plugging away, making the phone calls, looking through a lot of footage I wish I'd never seen, frankly, which I think you probably know what I'm talking about. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of hours of it. But then you just, you get the phone call and someone says, oh, I've got this. I mean, the one that I remember was the footage of Marie in the widow's basement. There was a Lebanese archivist, Donna Tremetta, who's the daughter of a famous Lebanese cartoonist, and she just knows everybody. And she said, "Oh, we were on holiday in the south of France," and she said, "Oh, I've got something you should look at." And it was this footage of Marie and Paul on the way out. That footage of Marie in the widow's basement. The widow's basement.
And that's because people were just there filming with their iPhones.
She had found. She said, "Oh, there's a guy, and he ran everything in and out of the tunnel." So everybody gave their drives to this guy at the tunnel. So I said, "Can I have a look?" I looked at it. She said, oh, he's got 493 other files. And I went to Amman the next day. I mean, I just called off the holiday and went to Jordan and just got the files and came back. So just a long.
Yeah, because we never realised that, you know, when we were doing our stuff, they were kind of like, what the hell are these doing? So they were shooting us, shooting them. So it was like a little bit of a...
Well, that's the extraordinary thing about this war, isn't it? That everywhere you go in Syria, and, you know, I've been quite a lot in Syria, people are filming all the time.
Yeah.
So everything is there. Everything is recorded.
You know, one thing, Lindsay, I would say over the years of making it is that we did encounter a lot of really understandable, it wasn't cynicism, it was just a tiredness. And I think a feeling that we've just been left and you've come here before and you're going to make a film and what are you going to do with it? You know, it's just for you, it's not for us. And there's no word of a lie. You'd mentioned Marie and Paul, the lights came on. How can we help you? And off they went. You know, it was like they knew what we went through. And it was incredible, actually. It just cut through all the cynicism. It just cut through all the, you know, all the despair. It's like a light went on.
Well, I think one of the most moving scenes for me is that crowd scene where they're holding up the banners. I mean, that's just
When Marie
unbelievable.
been killed and Paul was injured and they're...
Yeah,
had no idea.
I had no concept that had gone on. You know, the fact, what you got to remember there is they were under fire at that point.
Sure.
They were still getting shelled, and they, you know, somehow they got a printer working, and they printed shit. I can't get a printer working. If I went home tonight, I couldn't get a printer working. But they got a printer working with the right size paper.
And
amazing.
the name spelt right.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable.
And there they were. So when I saw that, I was absolutely bowled over. You know, kind of at that point when they were doing that, we were, you know, we were getting put back together and everything. But they were out doing it. And when I saw that, you know, Chris just kind of popped the laptop up and went, "Yeah, I'll have a look at this." And it was like, boom.
Yeah.
That was just something I never knew.
So, Kat, you have taken this court case out against Bashar al-Assad. You and your daughter Justine, who's here in the audience tonight as well. I mean, I guess you're a lawyer, so that's how you think. But tell me what made you decide that was the way to go in dealing with the death of your beloved sister?
Well, you know, I'm sitting between the two men that made that happen, but Paul, when shortly after he got out, told me she'd been targeted, which I suspected. You know, you see the footage of that baby dying, and Paul telling me they were bracketed, and with his knowledge of what the artillery sounds like, and I was just so angry. I wanted to do something the way you've done, you've done it, Paul. By the way, I mean, you brought the story out. You couldn't have brought it home more impactfully. But I was sort of, you know, with this angry feeling I want to do something, and then Scott stepped into my life through Reporters Without Borders and the Center for Justice and Accountability. And I remember meeting in Oyster Bay, and he came out and, you know, gave me a path to make it happen. And it may be sort of feudal or lawyer's revenge
but that's
or something.
What I want to ask about, because, and maybe I'll put this one to Scott. So, suing Bashar al-Assad, what's the point?
I mean, I think the point is to say that an attack like this, the assassination of a journalist, will not go unanswered. And in a sense, I think in the broadest sense for me, the point of this case is what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where a hero like Marie will be killed with absolute impunity? Or will we live in a world where we'll pull together across continents?
Well, I understand that, the ideal, but what will practically happen? I mean, can you explain it to us? Because this is a case that's been heard in Washington, right?
Yeah.
And Bashar al-Assad's never going to go to Washington. So explain how it works.
The way that it works is the Syrian government, the case is against the Syrian government itself. So it's holding the state responsible for the actions of the armed forces. And it's a civil suit. It's not a criminal prosecution. What we have done is built a case where we have presented hundreds of pages of documents, hours of witness testimony, establishing that the violence that you see in the film, the rocket attack that morning, was the product of really a month-long campaign of, at the highest level of government, launching an attack against journalists across the country, and specifically in Homs. As Paul and Marie are flying into Beirut, there's intelligence coming to the highest levels of the Assad regime from the airport in Beirut that foreign journalists are traveling in. The intel's telling them that they're sneaking across the border, as you see reenacted in the film. That evidence, I mean, the point of the case is to present the evidence in court and to say that the story doesn't end with the official Syrian narrative, right? The story ends with sort of retaking control of the narrative and saying, no, we're going to expose what happened. We're going to present the facts. We're going to have a court decide this. And as we're sitting here right now, it's quite possible the judge is working on the judgment right now. We submitted all of this evidence back in April, and we anticipate the judgment to come down any week now.
And let me ask Kat then at that point, what do you want to come out of this court case? What's the point of it for you?
Yeah, I mean, I started out wanting justice for Marie's death, but it's become a lot more than that. And letting the Syrian people know that at least I haven't forgotten them, my family hasn't forgotten them. Hopefully they realize there are people here who care about them. A big part of it was getting the evidence, and it's more evidence than we needed to make the case, but to make it available, translated for hopefully some future criminal case. If I could bring a criminal case and have Bashar al-Assad go to prison, that would be ideal, but I have to use the tools given. That's really important. And bringing attention to what people like Paul and Marie and Reme and Edith and Wael go through to put the news on your doorstep. And particularly as an American, where the press has now been labeled enemy of the people, I really want to at least make my voice heard that if you look at Idlib right now, where there are no Western journalists, the news is not coming out. We don't have footage like we saw coming out.
That's not completely true, actually. We do have quite a lot of footage coming out of Idlib. Because we're doing Idlib all the time on Channel 4 News, and there is footage coming out
We're
all the time.
Trump all the time, I guess.
Yeah, but you're just obsessed with Trump in America, so you don't actually cover Syria anymore. But there is footage coming out of Idlib all the time. But the issue is, I can remember, I've been writing Marie's biography, and one of the things in it is that there comes a point, and this is after she lost her eye in Sri Lanka, where she said the most difficult thing is not actually getting the story. It's not even persuading your editor, Sean, that you should go to get the story. She said it's having enough faith to believe that people will care once you've got it on the page or on the screen. And she really, she believed so much in telling the story, but that was the struggle that she had.
But she always
in
thought
herself.
she didn't tell it well enough. She always thought if she could only make it more vivid or make it more real.
I think everyone thinks that, that you come out every time and
that
you think,
people would care.
I could have done better, and I'll go back and do it again. And that's. I think also, though, with the case, it also shines a light back on the regime. For a number of years, we had the whole situation with ISIS going on, who were a bit of a gift for everyone, really. They were a gift for Assad. They were a gift for the West, because all of a sudden there were guys that we could recognise and go, we can bomb them. And so for a number of years, the focus shifted, and we flew over and blew the shit out of Raqqa. Well, at the same time, Bashar was getting on with what he'd started. He hammered Aleppo, he hammered Ghouta, Douma, and all them people were shipped into buses and are now in Idlib. And they're going to do the same again. But I think the case really does, at the end, when he will be found, it will work in our favour. Just hopefully that at the end of it, it makes it slightly more difficult to sit down with the Assads for Sunday dinner when they're slowly rehabilitated back into society, the international society, that you can turn and go, do you know that guy's been indicted in the States? These people who you're talking about doing peace at any cost with, you shouldn't really, because, look, they've been found guilty.
Before I throw it open, tell us what's happened to Wael, who I think we all fell in love with.
Wael,
the vegetarianist.
The vegetarianist.
I'm a vegetarianist too.
I remember phoning Wael up and just said, no, I saw him the first time. As you saw there, that what really was the first time I'd seen him. So I sat down and I said, where are you now? And he goes, I went, you're in Finland? And he went, no, I'm in fucking Finland. And he's like, Finland? And he went, no, fucking Finland. And he's like, going well there? No, he's married, he's got a baby, and, you know, as you can tell in that film, you know, I mean, I just love the bones of that guy, you know, and I will never be able to, you know, hug that guy enough. And you know,
he's wonderful.
He is just an absolute. You know, he could have buggered off at any point, and he stuck it out.
Yeah.
And you know, say again.
Does he speak Finnish?
Fucking Finnish. I don't know.
I'm not sure
I very much.
I doubt it. Actually, I don't think so. I don't think so. But he's safe, and that's one of the main things. I'm not sure how long we've got, but how long have we got? No time. 20. Okay, brilliant. All right, so let me throw it open. Have we got microphones? Yes, we have. So let me throw it open for people who've got. Has anybody got a question? This gentleman there.
Two questions. I think, am I right that the judge is Judge Ellis, who's just tried Paul Manafort? Actually, three questions. Secondly, was the trial with a jury? And the third question is, has the judge seen this film as part of the evidence?
I think those questions are all for you, Scott.
No, the judge is actually Amy Berman Jackson, who is in Washington, D.C. There are two Manafort prosecutions, one in Virginia, which was Ellis, and this is the second trial, which is scheduled very soon. So we're hoping perhaps she's going to get the judgment out before the Manafort trial begins, but if not, it'll come out afterwards. It is not a trial before jury. Under American law, a foreign state has the right not to be tried by a jury, but to be tried simply by a judge. And the last question was...
Has she seen it?
Has she seen the film?
I would love to know the answer to that question.
She has not seen the film, although she has seen some of the key pieces of film footage that are in the film. So, for example, there's the Skype recording of the attack itself. That was sort of out on YouTube for a while. In order to get that into the case, we actually had to track down the activist who recorded that. We had to find him so that he could authenticate the video, and it took years, but we managed to track him down and have his testimony and actually have the original high-resolution recording of it.
And Marie's last broadcast with Anderson Cooper,
of course,
also tough to get, but that was part of the evidence.
Yeah, and I think another thing which I think is very interesting, maybe Scott, you can tell us about the defectors, because some of the most extraordinary, I've read all of the evidence in this case. So tell us about the defectors, because that is really fascinating testimony.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is probably the most chilling thing for me when I watched the film is seeing the perspective of what's happening on the other side of the siege line. So as Marie is going live with these broadcasts from the media center, as the European journalists are arriving, we learned from defectors inside the Syrian government, one in particular, that there was an informant on the ground in Baba Amr who saw the foreign journalists arriving that night, who contacted Syrian intelligence and was brought into a headquarters in Homs, debriefed through the night. And at the same time, those broadcasts, that interview with Anderson Cooper, that was intercepted by the Syrians. They were driving these mobile vans around the city of Homs, intercepting satellite broadcast transmissions. And they worked throughout that night to cross-analyze the GPS coordinates of the intercepted broadcasts, compare that with the informant's description to have a positive ID on the location of the media center. I mean, I can tell you after I'd already been investigating this case for years, when I heard that story for the first time from this defector, I mean, the hairs were standing on my neck. And then it became this challenge of, well, how do you corroborate that? How do you verify this type of witness? We got access to hundreds of pages of Syrian intelligence documents that had been retrieved from abandoned intelligence branches. And, you know, there in the documents, there are no smoking. The Syrian government doesn't leave that type of traces. There are no kill orders or things like that. But what you have in the minutiae of the bureaucracy are the names of the officials. This is not public information. The names of the officials. Orders to surveil. I mean, we have a trail of documents with an order to wiretap a call between an activist and an Al Jazeera journalist. And what do they do with that? It gets sent to a brigadier general who forwards it to 4 military units to take all necessary measures. Why would you send a wiretap of an Al Jazeera interview to 4 military units? That's the type of evidence that has been presented to the judge, and that's what we expect the judgment to be based on.
Okay, any more questions from the audience? Yes, gentleman at the front here, the microphone is coming.
Whew. First of all, I just want to thank you for making this documentary. I don't think I've ever been so affected. And I said to you, Paul, a few months ago when you launched our film, Syria, The Impossible Revolution, that I felt my life came full circle because you were partly responsible for me losing 3 years of my life making that history of the revolution right back into a sad time, and it is. But I'm really glad I did it. But the reason we did it was to attempt to explode that false dichotomy. It's Assad or the terrorists. But you do that in this film in an honest, profound, compelling, and utterly truthful way that no reasonable person, and the propagandists in particular, will find impossible to refute. And this idea of bearing witness, I mean, I've said it to you before. I mean, I think what you've done is amazing. I think Mary Colvin was amazing because she had the courage to do that. And this, I'd say respectfully to Lindsay, who was an amazing journalist as well, that having our own journalists, well, this isn't a racist comment, but we're human. We relate to our own kind in the front line, telling us the story. Then it's a true story. And the reason she was killed was to keep us out, to allow the propaganda to triumph. And what you've done with this film, I'm slightly embarrassed, of course, I made one myself. I have to congratulate you on this.
Well,
But what you've done is,
That's
no,
all right.
but let me just finish this. I mean, I really have to say, I'm extremely grateful. I'm thankful. Thank you for doing this.
Thank
That's
you.
all right.
Chris.
Thank you. That was
Cheers,
very,
mate.
very nice.
And I really do recommend that out.
That's a very good
You
film.
check out the film The Impossible Revolution. It really puts everything in a lot of context that you've made there. That is also an epic.
Indeed. Any more questions or comments, or is everybody stupefied? No, there's a gentleman over there at the back. Yes, you.
Yeah, congratulations. Very powerful. Paul, good to see you again. Good to see you walking.
How you doing, mate? You
Yeah,
all right?
good. Yeah, I'm an old member of this agency. We lost half our colleagues, 8 out of 16. And it's a kind of very poignant thought to lose people you care about in a war. And I'm often asked, was it worth it? So I just wonder what you would say.
That's
to
a
that.
very difficult question to ask any of us, I think. I think that's an extremely difficult question. I don't know if you want to answer that, Paul.
It works on so many levels. I mean, did it do anything? I hope so. Yeah. Was it in vain? I don't think it was in vain. Would I rather not lose Marie? Of course. You know, that's hot. I would do anything to change that. But you've got to believe it's worth it, haven't you? Otherwise, you don't do it. You know, that's a very simplistic.
But I think it's
garbled
very.
answer.
I don't think any of us can feel that it was worth it to lose Marie. But I think that Paul and I were talking about this the other day, weren't we? That we don't want. It's very. This film is about Marie's death, and Marie's death was tragic and desperate. But it's really important, I think, to many people in this room that Marie is remembered for her life, not just her death. Because Marie was an absolutely extraordinary journalist and friend and sister and aunt and all of these things.
Not such a spectacular employee, huh, Sean?
No, not such an employee. And there's some areas we're not going to go into. But
She was quite a good drinking companion
she was a
as
very
well.
good drinking companion.
Good at
She was
that
very
too.
good at it.
Yeah.
Good storyteller.
So I think, maybe, Kat, maybe there's something you can say about Marie's life rather than her death.
Oh, there's so much I could say about Marie's life, but you know, the other difference watching this today was being with my daughter watching it, and Justine was very close to Marie at a young age.
Yep. And
It's-
Marie was a quite extraordinarily unusual aunt.
She absolutely was. So, you know, one of the most painful parts of losing her, because I feel so lucky to have had her in my life, she was she thought I was the most wonderful person in the world, and
I
I of
should-
course
maybe-
thought she was the most wonderful person in
Maybe
the world.
what I should say at this point is one of the things which I was very lucky enough to do in writing the biography was to find out about Marie's family. And Marie was the eldest and Kat the youngest. And from when Kat was born, I think you said to me that you were a little shadow. And
Yeah.
one of the other things which I liked, which is just a little anecdote, which I'm sure you'll remember, is that you said that you never knew any nursery rhymes, but
That's
you
right.
did know all the lyrics to Joni Mitchell's Blue album.
Yes.
Because that was what Marie, the hippie teenager, taught you when you were a little girl.
And
yeah?
she didn't know them. She'd call me up at parties and make me sing to her friends in London. But I just one of the hardest things about losing her is that Justine won't have her teenage and years with Marie because I know how close they were and what a wonderful time they would have had together.
But I think that I think that Marie's life as a journalist, from her coverage of Chechnya, Sri Lanka, East Timor, Iraq, everywhere. I mean, I think it's really important that we remember when we're talking about worth it. That's what we have to remember, not just the death in Syria. Let's remember all of the journalism she did, and my God, there's a lot of it. Really, there is a huge amount of it, and it's absolutely extraordinary. Jane, you wanted to say something? Hang on, there's a microphone coming.
As a great friend of Marie's, and can I endorse the fact that, my goodness, she loved you, Justine, and Kat. But Paul, one of the great lines was the 6-star hotel. I mean, and I am so happy.
other
because
side
I
of Marie.
found that very hard. But I am so happy that you were in the 6-star hotel before you went into that tunnel.
Me too. She did have good taste.
Oh yes, she did. Any more questions for the panel, Robin?
A memory and a question, if I may. The memory is of coming back from the funeral of a colleague of mine, John Schofield of the BBC, who was killed in Croatia. And I was coming back from his funeral with a colleague then, and we were asking ourselves, why do we do this? Should we carry on doing it? And the answer we came up with was, well, John thought it was worth doing, and John would want us to carry on doing it for that very reason.
Very true.
And I suspect Marie would give exactly the same answer. My question, though, taking up what you, Lindsay, and you, Paul, were just saying, echoing what Marie herself said, about having the faith in people's continued capacity to care when they see and read this kind of coverage. When you see what has happened since the siege of Homs, when you see that almost certainly President Assad is going to win this war and remain in power, do you still have that faith?
Right, who's going to take that one, Paul?
I think you had to have that. I mean, if we don't have that faith, then I think we'd just keep hitting brick walls, and no one would bother. I think just because you don't get the result you want, I don't think that's good enough reason to stop doing it. Because otherwise, we're going to live in a world that is quite dark, and people get away with murder. And I don't think, just because you do not get the end result, that there's always a degree of somebody's looking and someone's caring, and I just don't think it's. I couldn't just give up because I
You had an
didn't get
impact
the
here.
results.
You were committed to bring this story out. You did. You've had an impact on this group and on a larger group.
I think that the other issue is what is the alternative, and the alternative is ignorance. Now, there's a hell of a lot of ignorance out there already, and so you're fighting it. And in a sense, you just keep on fighting, right? We just keep on fighting, and half of the time, or more than half of the time, it does not work, right? I mean, this is an audience of journalists. We're in the frontline club, right?
And lawyers.
And lawyers, that's true as well.
Just saying.
And when the journalism doesn't work, we turn to the lawyers. So there's different ways of fighting, evil and killing. But you can't just stop doing it, because then everybody ends up as ignorant as Donald Trump. Right. There was a question at the back from the lady there. Yes, stand up, and the microphone will come to you. Oh, it's Joss. Yeah, sorry, I didn't say it was you. This is Joss. Yes.
All right, Paul. So, I know I've always asked you really silly questions, I mean, Paul is my information to the world, and now you've made this film. You're doing that for more than just me. It's very, very important. And my questions are always really childish and really stupid. But when I watched
No
that,
such thing as a stupid question, Joss.
you
Go
could
on.
be surprised. But I just think, when will that end? And what will have to happen for that to end?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that it really isn't a stupid question. That is the most important question about this whole situation. How does it end? I think horrendously, it's going to end horrendously. What's going to happen in Idlib is going to probably make what's happened already either pale or be equally as monstrous. I think I think we just have to keep trying to tell the world that, we owe to the Syrian people, I feel I do anyway, that they should not have to live under that man. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. Our politicians have to grow a set and do something, because it would be so unjust and against everything we've tried to do if the world was to turn around and go, okay, peace at any cost. I don't know if that's
Look, the answer
justifiable.
is, this is the answer.
She
In
knows.
Idlib, right, the answer...
I am actually a photographer. Can I just say?
But you're my information.
The answer is that the best option, the best possibility, is for Turkey and Russia to do a deal over Idlib, so that there isn't relentless bombardment.
Slaughter, yeah.
And slaughter. That is the best option, and it's not good. And Bashar al-Assad is back in power and will remain in power. And the only hope that we have is that over time that will change. Everybody dies in the end. And it's not good, but there is actually no way that he is going to be ousted right now, because he has Russian backing and he has Iranian backing. And intervention didn't work in Iraq, and it didn't work in Libya, and it didn't work in a lot of places. So we can't be naive. But that is the best option, and it is going to take quite some time. And it's not a good answer, and it's not a happy answer, but that, I think, is a truthful answer. Ruth, is that correct? Yep. That's it? This is a Beirut correspondent.
I mean,
right.
If I would just
Scott.
I would just add to that the question now, unfortunately, is not so much how can we end this in Syria. The question is, how do we stop this from being repeated? Because what happened in Syria is also the product of a deliberate undermining and challenge of the sort of international humanitarian system, the international institutions, the International Criminal Court, the UN Security Council, the entire international order that was set up after World War II that was tested in the Balkans and Rwanda, that was supposed to respond to these types of humanitarian situations. And perhaps it's not an armed intervention like in Iraq or Libya, but we don't know exactly what the proper response is. What we do know is that the institutions charged with carrying out those responses have been systematically eroded. And I think if we don't find some way as a global community to rebuild them, you're going to see more Syrias emerge. You're going to see powers like Russia, Iran, the Assad regime acting out in Syria in much the same way that Germany, Italy, and the Franco regime acted out in the Spanish Civil War.
And that means our own societies and countries. Ruth? Sorry, there's a microphone coming.
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to follow on from what you were saying. It's so interesting. That's my feeling too. It's like, what is the mechanism for holding these people to account? And I wondered if, as these kind of international mechanisms fail, if you think that this strategy of private companies launching lawsuits, organizations launching legal actions, do you think that what you're doing could be a way to try to tackle these things and become a more common practice, more broadly?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I think it's an example of social change coming from the grassroots up. I mean, how do you have a social transformation, right? How did this, like in the 19th century, right? How did the system of international slave trade, how did that get undermined? It wasn't solely, initially it was not at all through state action. It was through grassroots reformers. And so I think that, in a humble way, a small NGO filing a lawsuit against the Syrian government is a way of saying, when states don't act, when the UN fails, we still have civil society that can take action.
Has a very important point. Any more questions from the floor? Yes, Rosie, there.
Thank you very much for the film. And it's really wonderful that you put the stuff in about East Timor, because I think, like a lot of people, we all feel it was one of Marie's absolutely extraordinary achievements. This is really a question for you, Lindsay. I mean, do you find that it's increasing? I mean, I found when I was in the position of sending people off to cover wars, that when you stopped covering the wars, the readers that you had assumed the war was over. And it was a very odd thing, that unless you stuck at it day after day, but that what I've seen very much in the press, and I don't know whether it's true for you in the newsrooms, but we get much less foreign coverage. And what goes up is the kind of Instagram generation, the quick buzz, the wanting to believe that somehow the world's kind of all right. And that, do you find that your job is harder now than it was, and that there is less appetite for, well, looking at what we've just looked at?
Well, I think that actually what's happening at the moment is that Trump and Brexit have just sucked the air out of everything. And I mean, there's a lot of journalists in the audience. I don't know if you agree with me, but it's just harder and harder to make, Syria or Yemen or whatever. A, it's very difficult to get there. B, it's very dangerous. I mean, I think that Marie's death marked a moment. It was also the same time as the kidnapping of James Foley and Stephen Sotloff and their murders. And so that was a point at which it became unacceptably dangerous for many editors and for many of us. And so it's become much more difficult since then. But there are still ways of covering it. But I think that at the moment there's so much crisis in our own societies. You know, rise of fascism in Hungary and Poland, and what's happening in Italy, and certainly here Brexit and Trump. That I think is what is absorbing foreign budgets and journalists. And that's not actually entirely wrong to concentrate on those things, because those things are also part of the world order and what's going wrong in the world order. So those things are really important too. I'm supposed to be chairing this thing, not talking.
Have a glass of blue. I can't say it. Have a glass of blue nun and relax down.
Shut up. Right. Can we have any more? Yes, there's somebody there. He's got a
Lindsay,
question. It's not for me.
Can I just say
yes,
one thing?
Of course
Sorry,
you can.
Lindsay.
Yes.
Rosie, I actually, there is obviously a crisis, just an economic crisis in the way news is, and then the corporations have taken over, and I'm not disagreeing with anything Lindsay says, but I personally find that people are still very interested in what's going on in the world.
Yes.
And there are structural problems that we all know about. I do think the onus also is on us, whether you're a journalist or you're making a film, to take a film to people and engage them enough that they actually want to see it and want to find out about it. And I don't think it's enough to just say, the world's a terrible place, it's too hard. I think the job just changes and it gets maybe harder, and you just got to work harder. I mean, I think there's just different ways of telling stories. People are doing it now. I mean, Instagram, Twitter, that whole world, for me, is horrendous in a lot of ways. But in another way, you can connect with people. We would never have made this film without that world. We would have never found the footage.
Exactly.
I spent time, a lot of time on the phone, WhatsApp. It wouldn't have happened in any other way. To people in Ghouta and who were in Homs, who took the footage of Paul and Edith in hospital. And I think I said to someone one time, they said to me after about 2-hour phone call, like I said, you need to go, the bombs are dropping. And this guy said, yeah, but we really want to ask you a question. I said, what's that? They said, we want to just know, did you vote for Brexit? And there's this sort of extraordinary sort of life. They wanted to know what was going on. And the other thing that sorry? No, I didn't. But the other thing that I do remember about it, I think it's relevant, is that the same guy, I would talk to him regularly. There were heartbreaking conversations. And he was in Ghouta. They were moving the family from like neighborhood to neighborhood, to basement to basement. And he was explaining to me, I said, what's this thing about chlorine? And he said, this was after, by the way, telling me that he'd built a gym in one of the basements because he wanted to keep everyone to keep fit, and they were really trying to sort of life in terrible situations. But he said, when you're in a basement, you're sort of safe, but chlorine sinks. And it's that fear. It's just that fear. You smell it and you know you're trapped in a basement with your family. No, it's just so devastating. And then I said to him, I got frustrated and said to him, look, what can I do? And he said, just talking to you helps. You know, just knowing that somebody is interested in us and somebody's doing something. And I think it's that thing of, you know, is it worth it? No, it's not worth it to lose me. Of course it isn't. But what's the option? You just don't do anything. You don't make a film. You don't make reports. And I think the onus is on us just to be better. I mean, that's what I think
that makes complete sense. I'm going to take a couple. I said one more, didn't I? Who was the person who with the microphone? You, and then I'll come to you. Yes.
Yeah, just following on what you all
Can you
said.
speak into the microphone?
Oh, yeah. I work for Islamic Relief, and
Oh,
today
yes.
I spoke to our staff in Idlib, and just hearing like the anger and the fear, and it's like, what more can happen here for something to happen? It's kind of following on. But it just, it made me feel so ashamed to say, I'm really sorry, but the press, it's just so busy on UK news and Brexit and this, it's really hard. But they're like working all the hours God sends to do the work, but it's so important for them to talk to us and to kind of, what you are doing, the journalists and everything, means so much to them. Obviously, we've seen that in that film, but just talking to them today and watching this film tonight, I feel, you know, just really reiterates just how important journalists are to people there.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to take a question from this lady here, and then I'm going to go around the panel and wind up. So yes, your question.
Thank you. I think one of the things that the film does superbly is not only capture the determination of Marie, but also the strength and bravery of the local people.
Yes.
And I just wondered, Paul, how it changed your life knowing that people like the doctor who visited from the Red Crescent and the people who helped you in the tunnel potentially sacrificed their life for you.
Oh, I mean, people did die. You know, a lot of people died. Yeah, it changed my life forever. You know, and I'm happy it did. You know, to be exposed to people like that and people who will do what they did, you know, is a privilege. It's not, you know, I'm more than happy to keep doing this, and as I said, I'll keep doing it till they're all asleep, tucked up, happy in their beds. I have no problems with that. I've never met anybody like them people. So yeah, completely changed my life.
Okay, I want to go round the panel for a final thing. Chris, can you tell us what's going to happen with the film now?
Yeah, it's released tomorrow, and you know, we don't have we've got a beautiful distributor, Dogwoof, but we don't have big funds to, you know, primetime adverts. And we rely on word of mouth, so, I mean, our website is underthewiremovie.com, and it does rely on people to tell other people about it, and we're in cinemas from tomorrow, and there's a number of events. We're at BAFTA for 2 nights, we're at Amnesty International, so we will put that information out, and there are a number of screenings. I mean, you've all seen the film, but, you know, I would just like to think that, you know, if you could take anything away, it would be to tell people about it and get them to go and see it, and just, you know, and just spread the word that way. I would just like to say one thing, that it's very, for me, you know, we were in Washington when I watched the film in Washington with Kat at the festival, but it's a very strong thing for me, for, you know, to have you here, Kat. And I think Marie was a inspiration to all of us, many of us, all of us, I think. But so are you, actually, for what you've done and for keeping it going, and I just wanted to say that to you.
Scott. Scott, so you said you're waiting for this judgment. Then what? What happens?
So practically speaking, the judgment is going to tell the story based on all of the evidence that we found. It's going to be an official ruling. We hope that the Assad regime deliberately targeted Marie, and then a damages award, which we normally in these types of cases is calculated to be enough to actually make it sting against a foreign government. Within the framework of this case, the task then becomes trying to track down Assad's assets around the world and hit them where it hurts. Beyond that, there is a criminal investigation in France, and Kat and Paul have intervened as civil parties in that case. We presented the entire dossier of evidence in Washington. We presented it to the judges in France, and I was just there a few days ago, and I have to say it galvanized them. This investigation is pushing forward, and CJA will continue to work on developing more evidence, developing more documents, more witnesses, The goal really is to see international arrest warrants issued against the actual regime officials that carried out this attack. CJA is a very small nonprofit. We're entirely funded through donors. And if you feel so inclined, please see Blake right here in the front.
And you have,
help
I
us with
think
the
there
case.
are the leaflets there on your seats as well. Kat, for you, what's the most important thing for continuing Marie's legacy?
That's a really hard question because there's so many aspects of it. I'm just so appreciative to everyone here on the stage and everyone here in the audience. I am really proud, honestly, of the Marie Colvin Center for International Reporting on Long Island.
I mean, that was one of the things I wanted to say. Maybe can you just tell us a little bit about the Marie Colvin Center for International Reporting? It's at Stony Brook University on Long Island. Just tell us a little bit about it.
It was inspired by a young journalist who was also a professor there, who Marie sort of mentored when she was a cub reporter. And there are so many people I've met. I mean, tonight even. And she had the idea, and we all, on Long Island, there's a lot of support in New York, on Long Island, and among journalists, including Christiane Amanpour, who gave us really seed money to get it going. Lindsay, as a visiting professor there. But it reflects Marie's desire to lift up young journalists, and especially young women journalists, and the importance of journalism to all of us, and the importance of bearing witness. And I'm always just so amazed, not only at the students of Stony Brook, but really young journalists all over the world who contact me because they're writing about Marie, or they've read about Marie, or they want to be like Marie, or they want to understand Marie, or they're inspired by Marie. And that, to me, is her legacy, is the inspiration that so many young journalists and young people feel.
From Marie, yeah.
From Marie.
Yeah. Paul, so you tell us what you're going to do now. You're going to go around the country with the film, are you?
Yeah, we're going on a tour up around Glasgow, Liverpool, Cambridge, York, and then hopefully festivals. And I think all I can do really is keep telling the story of my friends who died, telling the story, and keep telling the story of the people who died to keep me alive so I could tell the story. That's all I foresee for the near future, is to just keep telling the story and get as many people to be interested as possible.
Yeah. And I would say, just before we wrap up, I would say Marie's biography will come out at the beginning of November, and that will be her life, not just her death.
Yes.
And that, as Kat said, I went to the Marie Colvin Center for International Reporting in Long Island for a semester, which was wonderful. And one of the things about the students there is these are not Ivy League students. These are students, many of whom do not come from privileged backgrounds. And I'm still in touch with some of them, and they still write to me and tell me what they're doing in Marie's legacy and in her way of reporting, which is great. And we also have a small project, which some of us here, Jane Wells is in the back here, called the Marie Colvin Journalist Network, which is providing support for young female journalists in the Arab world. So Syrian journalists, Jordanians, Egyptians, and so on. And we provide small amounts of money for counseling or for safety equipment, or, there's a website where they can do peer-to-peer support, this kind of project, which I think is also, between what you're doing on Long Island and what we're doing in the Arab world, I think we really are keeping her legacy alive, and she will never be forgotten. Thank you all.
And Lindsay, one last piece. We are so grateful to you, the panelists, to Paul, to Kat, to Scott, to Chris, and we haven't acknowledged all the people that are watching in San Francisco and the panel,
sorry, it's being live streamed.
and New York and Sweden. And we are so grateful that they know about all these wonderful causes. So thank you to all the people who are tuning in right now. And as a special gift from Dogwoof and Frontline Club and CJA and all the people who made this possible, Sherman Sterling, thank you so much to you. I will get them right, Kat and Justine. Lindsay, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Can I just say, see that guy at the back looking really scared behind the pile of books? That's my publisher. He thinks I'm not going to plug the book.
Oh, right, sorry. And buy Paul's book.
but I did.
Very good. Looks like mine.